The binding cloth was already wound twice around Oliver Keller's wrist when Kasia Ironhide tore it off with one hand and threw it into the Greywash River. The crowd on the bridge went silent. Even the water seemed to hush beneath the old stone arches. Baron Corwin Vance's steward, a thin man named Fenn who had rehearsed this ceremony for 3 sleepless nights, stood with his mouth open and the wedding scroll trembling in his fingers. "My lady," Fenn stammered, "the wrist binding is tradition." It signifies rope," Kasia said, her voice a low rumble that carried across the whole span of the bridge, over the heads of the human villagers on one side and the mounted orc riders on the other. "I have worn enough rope in my life. I will not wear it on my wedding day." She stood a full head and shoulders above every man on that bridge, green-gray skin catching the pale morning light, black hair braided tight against her skull, and threaded with small iron rings that clinked when she moved. She wore no wedding gown. She had refused that too that morning, throwing the offered white dress back into Fenn's arms so hard he had staggered. Instead she stood in her own fitted travel leathers, dark and supple, laced tight up her sides and across a chest built for both strength and a fighter's speed, a wide belt cinched at her waist, vambraces on her forearms scarred from old battles. She looked less like a bride and more like a woman who had ridden here to conquer the place, and in a way Oliver thought she had. He stood beside her at the center of the bridge, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life, and he had felt small often enough. Oliver Keller was not a large man. He was broad enough through the shoulders from years of hauling toll gates and repairing planks, but next to Kasia Ironhide, he looked like a boy standing next to a mountain. His hair was sandy brown, cut short and uneven because he cut it himself with a belt knife, and his face had the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors in wind and rain for coin that barely fed him. He wore his one good shirt, patched at the elbow, and his boots had been resoled twice. "The bread must be broken and shared," Fenn tried again, holding out the small round loaf that the miller's wife had baked that morning special for the occasion. "It is meant to show you will feed each other all your days." "I can hunt," Kasia said flatly. "I do not need bread broken for me like a child." Somewhere in the crowd someone laughed, quickly stifled. Oliver felt heat crawl up his neck, not from shame but from something else entirely, something he did not yet have a name for. She was magnificent in her defiance. She stood there refusing every soft human tradition meant to make her small, meant to fold her into a shape that would fit quietly into their world, and she did it without a flicker of doubt. "The oath of obedience," Fenn said, voice weaker now, sensing already how this would go. "The bride kneels and speaks the words of submission to her husband's household." Kasia's laugh was short and sharp, like a blade drawn an inch from its sheath. "I have knelt to no one since I was 12 summers old and put my knee into my uncle's throat for daring to think I would kneel to him. I will not kneel here, on a bridge in front of strangers, for a man I have known one single day." Fenn looked over his shoulder, as if hoping the Baron himself might materialize to rescue the ceremony. He did not. Baron Vance had sent his steward to handle this marriage precisely, because he did not wish his own name attached to it if it went badly, and it was already, by every measure Fenn understood, going very badly. Across the bridge, on the far bank where the orc riders sat their shaggy mountain horses in a loose, watchful line, a broad-shouldered orc with gray threading his beard, and a single curved horn broken at the tip watched his daughter with an expression that might have been pride, or might have been the wince of a man who had negotiated this peace at great cost and now feared it unraveling in front of him. Thakar Ironhide did not speak. He had said his piece already in the weeks before, when he had told his daughter that her marriage to a human bridge-warden would buy 3 years of peace for their people. 3 years the clan desperately needed to recover from a hard winter and a harder war. Kasia had agreed to the marriage. She had never agreed to be tamed by it. Further back, near the human side of the crossing, stood a man in a long gray coat with a silver chain of office around his neck, his face narrow and pale, his eyes the flat colorless gray of river ice in winter. Inquisitor Darrow Vane had ridden 2 days from the capital to witness this union, ostensibly as a formality of the crown's blessing on any treaty involving the border clans. But Oliver had caught the way the man's eyes moved over Cash's face, her hands, the ink-dark tattoos that marked her collarbone, the way a butcher's eyes moved over livestock deciding which cut to take first. Something cold sat behind that gaze, and Oliver did not like it, though he could not yet say why. Fenn cleared his throat one last time, desperate, and held up the final item, a length of soft white ribbon, meant for the hand-holding, the oldest and gentlest of all the customs, the one custom that even Fenn's grandmother had told him no bride in living memory had ever refused, because it asked so little. The joining of hands, Fenn said, is meant only to show that you will walk beside each other in trouble and in peace for as long as you both shall. That one, Cassia said. Fenn blinked. My lady, that one I will keep. And before Fenn could even lift the ribbon, before the words of the old custom could be spoken, Cassia Ironhide reached out and took Oliver Keller's hand in hers. Her hand swallowed his. Her fingers were rough with callus, strong enough to crush stone, and yet she held his hand as if it were something precious, something she had decided, in that instant, she intended to keep. Oliver looked up into her face. He had to look up, considerably up, since even standing close she stood taller than him by more than a head, and found her looking back at him with an expression he had not expected. Not scorn, not resignation. Something searching, something almost curious, as though she were only now in this touch, deciding whether the rest of it might be bearable after all. This one I choose, she said, quieter now, meant for him alone, though the whole bridge heard it in the stillness. Not because your steward tells me to, because I will walk beside you, Oliver Keller, and I want my hand in yours when I do it. Not rope, not ribbon, my hand, yours. That is the only vow I need. Oliver's throat had gone tight. He was a man of few words on the best of days, and he had none at all now, so he did the only thing that felt true. He tightened his fingers around hers, gently, the way a man might hold something he was afraid of breaking, though he knew perfectly well she could not be broken, and he said, "Then that is the vow I will keep too, for as long as you want it kept." "Forever then," Cassia said, as though it were the simplest fact in the world, and turned to face the crowd, her hand still locked in his, daring anyone on that bridge to say a single word against it. No one did. Not even Inquisitor Vane, though his cold eyes lingered on their joined hands a moment longer than was comfortable, before he turned his horse and rode back toward the town of Fenwick without another word. That was how Oliver Keller, tollkeeper of the Greywash Crossing, came to be married to the tallest, fiercest, most stubborn woman he had ever laid eyes on, and how their marriage began not with a customary kiss or a shared cup of wine, but with her hand wrapped around his on a stone bridge in the mist, and the quiet, world-altering understanding that she had chosen him. The days that followed were not easy ones, though Oliver had not truly expected them to be. The toll house sat at the eastern end of the Greywash Crossing, a squat stone building with a single chimney and a shingle roof that leaked in 3 places Oliver had never found time to fix. It had one large room downstairs where he collected tolls and kept his ledgers, and a narrow loft above reached by a ladder, where a single bed had, until recently, been enough for a lonely man. Now it had to be enough for 2, and Cassia's shoulders alone seemed too broad for the space, though she never once complained of it. She did not complain of much. She complained loudly about the pillows Fenwick's goodwives had sent as a wedding gift, too soft, she said, like sleeping on clouds made for children. And she complained about the taste of the bread from the mill. And she complained, most of all, about the way the villagers who crossed the bridge each morning would not meet her eyes, would slide their toll coins across the counter to Oliver as if her hand might be poisonous, would murmur behind their palms about the tollkeeper's monster of a wife. "They fear you," Oliver told her, the 3rd morning, after a farmer's wife had practically thrown her coin at him rather than let it pass near Cassia's outstretched hand. They fear what they do not understand, Kasia said, arms crossed, watching the woman scurry across the bridge with her cart. It is an old fear, older than this bridge, older than your kingdom. My people have feared humans the same way for the same reason since before either of us were born. She looked down at him and something in her expression softened just slightly. I did not choose you because I expected it to be easy, Oliver Keller. Then why did you choose me? He asked. He had wondered it every day since the wedding, turning the question over like a coin in his pocket, unable to make sense of why a woman like her, who could have refused this marriage entirely and taken the punishment for it, who was strong enough to have simply walked away from any human who displeased her, had instead reached out and taken his hand in front of 100 witnesses and called it the only vow she needed. Kasia considered the question for a long moment, watching the mist curl up off the river below the bridge. Because when Fen read the names of the men your baron considered for this marriage, I asked about each one. Lords with fine coats. A knight who once burned an orc village to the ground and called it glory. A merchant who wanted only the trade rights my father would grant with the union. She turned to look at him fully. And then there was you, the tollkeeper. No title, no fortune, no ambition beyond keeping this bridge standing so people could cross it safely. My father's man asked around the town about you, and everyone said the same thing, that you were kind to travelers who could not pay, that you had once given your own coat to a beggar in the snow, that you were, in their words, nobody of consequence. She reached out without warning and touched 2 fingers briefly to his jaw, a touch so light it startled him more than a blow would have. I have had enough of men of consequence, Oliver Keller. I wanted a man with a good heart. It seems I found one. Oliver did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, only reached for her hand where it had fallen back to her side and held it, and she let him. And that became, in those early days, their private language, not words, which came slowly and carefully between 2 people raised in such different worlds, but hands, found and held in the quiet moments between toll collections, across the small table where they ate their meals. In the dark of the loft, where neither slept easily yet in a bed built for one. The prejudice did not vanish because Oliver wished it would. 3 days after the wedding, a wagon of grain merchants refused outright to cross while Kasia stood in view, and Oliver had to walk her back inside the toll house, apologizing with his eyes though his voice stayed steady before he could collect their coin. She had not argued. She had simply gone, jaw tight, and it was that tightness, more than any shouted insult, that told him how much it cost her. That night he found her sitting on the bridge itself, alone, looking down at the black water, her long legs hanging over the edge of the stone parapet in a way that would have terrified any ordinary person given her height above the river. They will never look at me as anything but a monster, she said without turning. Not your townsfolk, not your baron, perhaps not even you in the end. I'm looking at you right now, Oliver said, coming to sit beside her close enough that his shoulder brushed her arm. I don't see a monster. What do you see? He thought about it honestly, because he sensed she wanted honesty and would smell out a lie in an instant. I see the strongest person I've ever met, he said. I see someone who could have run from this marriage and didn't. I see someone who's more scared of being unwanted than she'd ever admit to a soul. He felt her go very still beside him. And I see someone I already can't imagine this bridge without. Kasia turned her head slowly to look at him, and in the moonlight her yellow eyes were bright and unreadable. You are either very brave, Oliver Keller, or very foolish to say such things to an orc twice your size. Maybe both, he admitted. She laughed then, a real laugh, low and warm, and it was the first time he had heard it, and he decided in that moment that he would spend considerable effort in the future trying to earn that sound again. She took his hand on the bridge that night too, unprompted, and they sat together above the dark water until the mist rolled in thick around them, and neither of them moved to go inside. The attack came on a night 3 weeks later, when raiders from the deep moor outlaws who preyed on both human and orc travelers alike, unaffiliated with any clan or crown, desperate men who had nothing left to lose tried to storm the crossing to steal the toll strongbox and whatever else they could carry. Oliver woke to the sound of the bridge gate splintering. He was on his feet with his old hunting knife in hand before he was fully awake, and Kasia was already ahead of him, descending the ladder in 3 motions instead of the usual careful climb. Her warblade, a heavy curved weapon she had brought from her clan and kept oiled and ready beside the bed despite Oliver's protests, that surely they would not need it here, already drawn and gleaming in the low light of the banked hearth fire. There were 5 of them, rough men with torches and cudgels and 1 rusted sword between them, and they had expected an easy toll house robbery from a lone bridge warden. What they found instead, bursting from the toll house door into the torchlit chaos of the bridge, was 7 feet of furious orc warrior moving with a speed that seemed impossible for her size, her braid whipping behind her, her warblade catching torchlight as it swept the legs from beneath the nearest man before he had even registered she was upon him. Oliver came right behind her, and though he was no warrior, he had spent enough years at a lonely crossing to know how to use his fists and his knife when travelers turned violent, and he put himself instantly between Kasia's exposed back and the second raider, who had circled wide with a knife of his own, meaning to strike at her from behind while she dealt with the others. Oliver. Kasia's voice cracked across the bridge, sharp with something that was not quite fear but close kin to it, as the raider's blade came for him. He got his forearm up in time, took the cut along his sleeve instead of his throat, and drove his own knife hard into the man's side, and then Kasia was there, hauling the wounded raider bodily off him and throwing him into the river with a splash that echoed off the stone arches, and the remaining 3, seeing their companions dead or drowning, fled into the moor mist and did not return. It was over in less time than it took to tell of it. Oliver stood shaking on the bridge, blood running warm down his arm, and Kasia turned to him with wild eyes, her warblade still dripping, and for one terrible moment he thought she might be furious with him for standing between her and the knife. Instead, she dropped the blade with a clatter on the stones and crossed to him in 2 strides and took his wounded arm in both her hands, her touch suddenly, impossibly gentle, examining the cut with the same fierce concentration she'd shown moments before in battle. "You fool," she said, voice rough. "You could have let me handle him. You are not built for knife fighting, Oliver Keller. Neither are you built for taking a blade in the back," he said, "and yet here we both are alive." She looked at him for a long moment, her thumb tracing lightly near the edge of the wound, careful not to press it, and something shifted behind her eyes. Some wall he had not even known was there beginning finally to crack. "No one has ever done that for me," she said quietly. "Put themselves between me and a blade. Everyone assumes I need no protecting. Perhaps I do not, but no one has ever tried all the same." "Get used to it," Oliver said, and though his voice shook slightly from the pain and the shock of the fight, he meant every word. "I intend to keep trying." She kissed him then for the first time, right there on the blood-slicked stones of the bridge in the torchlight, her hands cradling his face with a tenderness that seemed impossible from hands that had just felled 2 grown men, and Oliver kissed her back with everything he had, tasting smoke and iron and something warmer underneath, and when they finally broke apart she rested her forehead against his, careful of her greater height, and said, "I did not expect this. Any of this. You." "Neither did I," Oliver admitted, "but I'm glad of it, I'm glad of you." They bound his arm together in the toll house afterward, her hands surprisingly deft with the linen wrappings despite their size, and when it was done, she did not let go of his hand again for the rest of that long night, and he found he did not want her to. It was 2 months into their marriage, in the deep gray chill of an autumn that seemed determined to turn early to winter, when the shared secret found them, rather than the other way around. Oliver was checking the toll gate late one night, later than he usually stayed awake, when he heard movement in the reeds along the riverbank below the bridge. Not the splash of an animal, but the careful, deliberate quiet of someone trying very hard not to be heard. He went to investigate with a lantern, expecting perhaps another raider, and found instead a woman huddled in the mud beneath the bridge's central arch, cradling a boy of perhaps 10 years against her chest, both of them shivering, both of them bearing on their forearms the unmistakable raised scar of a brand. A small circle crossed by a single line, the mark the Crown's Inquisition burned into anyone caught practicing hedge magic, or midwifery with old charms, or simply being born with orc blood mixed too visibly into human features. "Please," the woman whispered, seeing Oliver's lantern light fall over her, flinching as though expecting a blow. "Please, we mean no harm, we only need to cross. They are close behind us, please." Oliver's mind raced. He knew, of course he knew, about the purge sweeping the Greymoor March these past months. Inquisitor Vane's patrols had grown more frequent, more thorough, rounding up anyone whose blood or beliefs marked them as different, dragging them off to the capital or, more often now, simply burning the brand into their flesh on the spot and driving them out into the wilds to fend for themselves or die of exposure. He had heard the rumors of a hooded figure called the Moor Ghost who struck at these patrols from the mist and freed their captives, a figure both feared and, in certain quiet corners, quietly prayed for. He had not expected to find two of the purge's victims cowering beneath his own bridge, begging for passage into orc lands where the Inquisition's writ did not reach. "Kasia," he called softly, and within moments she was there, having heard the commotion, warblade in hand. And when she saw the brands on the woman's and boy's arms, her expression changed entirely, hardening into something Oliver had not seen from her before, not battle fury, but a colder, older kind of anger. "How long have they been hunted?" she asked the woman directly. 3 days, the woman gasped. "They caught my husband. They branded my son for having his grandmother's eyes. She was half-orc from generations back, no more than a story in our family, and still they marked him a monster." Kasia knelt in the mud, heedless of her leathers, and looked the boy in his frightened face. "You are no monster," she said, in a voice Oliver had never heard from her, gentle in a way that made his chest ache. "You have old blood in you. That is not a curse. That is a gift, though the world will tell you otherwise for a long while yet." She looked up at Oliver, and in her eyes was a question, and a decision already half made, waiting only for his agreement to become whole. "We'll take them across," Oliver said, before she could even ask. "Tonight, now before the patrol reaches the bridge." And so began the secret that would bind them together more tightly than any wedding custom ever could have. That night, Oliver falsified his toll ledger, recording no crossing at all for the hours when he and Kasia guided the woman and her son across the bridge and a mile beyond into the moor, to a shepherd's abandoned croft where Kasia knew, from childhood visits with her father, a hidden path down into a ravine that led eventually to orc territory and safety beyond the Crown's reach. It became their private world after that. Twice more that autumn, and then with increasing frequency as the purge worsened through the winter, travelers came to the bridge in the deep hours of the night, some sent by whispered word from sympathetic villagers, some finding their way by pure desperate instinct toward the one crossing rumored to sometimes, quietly, look the other way. Oliver kept 2 sets of ledgers, one for the Baron's tax collector and one true record known only to himself and Kasia, hidden beneath a loose stone in the toll house floor. Kasia learned the safest paths through the moor by moonlight, memorizing which standing stones marked safe ground and which marked the edges of bog that could swallow a cart and horse both without a trace. They did not speak of it to anyone, not to Finn, not to the villagers who still eyed Kasia with suspicion each morning, not even at first, fully to each other in words. It simply became something they did together, a rhythm of danger and quiet triumph that knit them closer than any spoken vow. Lying together afterward in the loft, exhausted, mud-streaked, hearts still hammering from the night's crossing, Oliver would find Kasia's hand seeking his in the dark, and he would hold it, and something would ease in both of them, the shared weight of the secret somehow lighter for being carried by two. "You could refuse this," Kasia told him once, near midwinter, after a particularly close call when an Inquisition patrol had passed within a stone's throw of the bridge, while they hid a family of 3 beneath a hay wagon. "You could tell me it is too dangerous, that you have a bridge to keep and a toll to collect, and no business risking your neck for strangers with old blood in them." "I could," Oliver agreed, "but I won't. You didn't marry a man who looks away, Kasia. Whatever else I am, I'm not that." "No," she said softly, and there was something like wonder in her voice even now, months into their marriage, as though she still had not quite believed her own good fortune in finding him. "You are not that at all." She kissed him then, deeply, in the dark of their loft, and what began as tenderness built quickly into something more urgent, months of careful restraint finally giving way beneath the weight of danger shared and trust hard won. He had touched her before in small ways, learned the shape of her hands and the warmth of her skin in stolen moments. But that night, with the secret between them binding tighter than any oath, she pulled him close with a hunger that matched his own, and he answered it without hesitation. And for the first time since the wedding on the bridge, Oliver Keller understood fully what it meant to be wanted, not tolerated, not merely accepted as a convenient husband for a political peace, but wanted fiercely, completely, by a woman who could have had anyone and chose, again and again, only him. Afterward, wrapped together in the narrow bed that no longer felt too small, she traced her fingers along his jaw in the darkness and said, "In my clan, when a warrior chooses a mate, there is a custom, a small cut." Here she touched the inside of her wrist, and the blood is shared, mixed, so that some part of each is always carried in the other's skin. "I did not ask this of you at our wedding. I did not think you would understand it or want it." "Ask me now," Oliver said. She went still. "You would agree, without knowing fully what it means. Tell me what it means, then." "It means," Kasia said slowly, "that I claim you as mine fully in the old way of my people, not merely the way your Baron steward wrote on a scroll. It means there is no undoing it, not by any custom either of our people know. It is not a wedding vow. It is deeper than that." Oliver held out his wrist without another word. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for hesitation and finding none. And then, with a small blade kept for exactly this purpose, she made a shallow cut across her own wrist and then, with exquisite care, across his, and pressed the 2 wounds together. Her yellow eyes locked on his the entire time, and murmured words in the old orc tongue that Oliver did not understand but felt settle into his chest like a second heartbeat. "There," she said when it was done, wrapping both their wrists together in a strip of linen. "Now you are truly mine, Oliver Keller, not by treaty, not by your Baron's decree, by my own choosing and yours." "I chose you the moment you threw that ribbon in the river," Oliver said, and meant it entirely. And she laughed that low, warm laugh he had come to treasure above all sounds, and pulled him close again. And the winter night passed warm despite the frost gathering thick on the toll house windows. The wasting sickness came with the spring thaw, and it came for orc and human alike. It began, as these things often do, quietly. A few cattle found dead in their pastures near Fenwick, their flesh gone gray and wasted as though something had drained the life from them overnight. Then a shepherd's flock, a dozen sheep found in the same state near the standing stones that dotted the high moor. Then, inevitably, people. First an old woman in Fenwick who had drunk from a moorland spring, then 2 children from the same family, wasting away over the course of a fortnight despite every remedy the town's physician could offer, their skin turning the same terrible gray as the dead cattle before they died. Word reached the Ironhide clan camps as well. Kasia's father sent a rider across the bridge with grim news. 3 children in the clan's northern camp had sickened the same way, and the clan's own healers had no more answers than the human physicians did. Fear, as it always does, sought a cause, and causes, in a land already primed by months of purge and prejudice, were not hard to invent. Inquisitor Vane arrived in Fenwick within the week, and his sermons in the market square left little doubt where he intended to place the blame. This sickness is no natural plague. he declared to a crowded, frightened square, standing on the steps of the town hall with his gray coat whipping in the moor wind. "It is a curse, sent by the old magic that festers still in this land, magic carried in tainted blood, magic given shelter and comfort by those who should know better." His eyes, Oliver noted with a cold feeling in his stomach, moved deliberately toward the edge of the crowd where he and Kasia stood together, her hand, as always now, in his. "This treaty of peace between our peoples has opened the door to corruption. I do not say the fault lies with any one soul. I say only that this land has grown too tolerant of what it once, wisely, feared." The crowd murmured, and more than a few eyes turned toward Kasia, and Oliver felt her hand tighten around his. Not from fear, he understood, but from the effort of restraining herself from crossing the square and throttling the Inquisitor where he stood. "He means to use this sickness against us," Kasia said that night, pacing the toll house floor too agitated to sit. "Against the treaty, against every soul we have helped across this bridge. He needs only enough frightened people nodding along, and he can break the peace my father bled for and call it righteousness. Then we need the truth of what's causing this before he finds his excuse," Oliver said. "A real cause, something that proves it isn't witchcraft or cursed blood at all." It was 2 nights later that a name surfaced, whispered among the frightened travelers who still, despite everything, found their way to the bridge seeking safe passage. The name of the moor ghost, the hooded figure who had been striking at Inquisition patrols for the better part of a year, freeing captives, vanishing into the standing stones before pursuit could catch her. Rumor now claimed she had been seen near the poison springs, gathering water in glass vials, muttering over the dead cattle as though searching for something specific. "If anyone knows what's truly killing these animals and these children," said the traveler who brought the news, an old drover Oliver had waved across the bridge without toll a dozen times before, "it would be her. They say she was a healer once before they branded her, best in 3 counties before the Inquisition came for her." Oliver and Kasia looked at each other across the toll house table, and without a word spoken between them, both understood what needed to be done. They found her 3 nights later, exactly where the old drover's rumor had placed her, among the ring of standing stones the local folk called the 9 Sisters, high on the moor where the mist gathered thick even in daylight. She was smaller than Oliver had expected from the legends, a thin, gray-haired woman with a hooded cloak too large for her frame, kneeling beside one of the ancient stones with a collection of glass vials and dried herbs spread before her on a worn cloth, muttering to herself in the low, cadenced way of someone thinking aloud. She came up fighting when Kasia's shadow fell over her, a wickedly curved skinning knife appearing in her hand with startling speed for a woman of her apparent age, and it was only Oliver's raised hands and quick words. "We mean no harm. We've helped others like you cross the bridge. Ask anyone in the Moor Crofts. We're not hunting you," that stopped her from either attacking or bolting into the mist. "You're the tollkeeper," the woman said slowly, lowering the knife a fraction, studying him with sharp, assessing eyes that belied her frail appearance. "And you're the orc bride he married for the Baron's treaty. I've heard of you both. The bridge that looks the other way." She glanced between them. "Why have you come looking for me, then, if not to collect a bounty? There's a fine one on my head now, since the Inquisitor decided I'm worth more caught than left to wander." "We need to know what's killing the cattle," Kasia said bluntly, "and the children, before Vane uses their deaths to burn down everything we've built here." The woman's face changed at that, a flicker of something like recognition, or perhaps relief at finally being asked the right question by the right people. "My name is Gret Ashwood," she said. "I was a healer in Fenwick once, before they decided my grandmother's orc blood, 3 generations back and barely a shadow in my face, made me unfit to touch a birthing bed or set a broken bone. They branded me and drove me into the moor 11 years ago. I have survived here since by knowing this land better than any Inquisitor ever will." She held up one of her glass vials, filled with cloudy water. "And what I know now is that the deep spring beneath these stones has turned." There is an old vein of cursed mineral in the rock here, disturbed, I think, by the mining the Baron's men did 2 winters past on the moor's edge, seeking iron ore. It leaches into the water table. It is not witchcraft, tollkeeper. It is poison, plain and simple, seeping into every stream that feeds from this high ground, and it will keep killing anything that drinks from it, cattle or sheep or human child or orc child alike, until someone stops it. Can it be stopped? Oliver asked. There is an old rite, Gret said slowly, known to my grandmother, half remembered by me, that can seal a poisoned vein, a working that predates even your Inquisition's fear of magic, older than either of our two people's quarrels. It requires certain herbs found only on this moor, and it requires more strength than these old bones can give the ritual alone. Her eyes moved to Kasia. It requires, I think, someone of orc blood strong enough to hold the working steady while it is done. I could not manage it by myself even were I 20 years younger. I have tried twice, alone, and failed both times. Then we do it together, Kasia said immediately. Tell us what you need. They worked through that night and the next by the light of a shielded lantern, gathering the herbs Gret named moor thistle, silverleaf, a rare white moss that grew only in the shadow of the standing stones. And on the third night, beneath the 9 sisters with the mist curling thick around their ankles, Gret Ashwood led Kasia through the old rite while Oliver stood watch at the ring's edge, heart in his throat. Unable to help with the working itself, but unwilling to be anywhere else while his wife knelt at the poisoned spring's edge with her hands buried wrist-deep in the cold black water, chanting words in a tongue that predated even the old orc tongue she had used to bind there. Wrists together, while Gret's frail voice wove alongside hers, guiding the working toward its close. It took until nearly dawn, and when it was done, Kasia collapsed backward into Oliver's waiting arms, exhausted and shaking, her hands scorched faintly at the fingertips from whatever force had passed through them. But the spring water, when Gret tested it with trembling fingers, ran clear for the first time in weeks. It's done, Gret breathed. The vein is sealed. It will take some days for the poison already in the ground to clear fully, but no more will leach into the water. The dying should stop within the week. They should have felt triumphant. Instead, less than an hour later, as the first gray light of dawn broke over the moor, a dozen mounted figures in Inquisition gray came riding hard out of the mist, and Oliver understood with a sinking cold horror that someone, perhaps the old drover, perhaps some other frightened soul pressed for information, had betrayed their location. Gret Ashwood was taken before Oliver or Kasia, exhausted from the night's working, could raise a proper defense. Kasia fought 2 of the Inquisition men to the ground with her bare hands before a third struck her from behind with a cudgel, and Oliver threw himself bodily between the 4th man's blade and his wife's fallen form, taking a shallow cut across his shoulder for his trouble, screaming Kasia's name as the world spun dizzyingly around him. When the dust settled, Gret Ashwood was in chains, her hood torn away to reveal her branded arm to the rising sun, and Inquisitor Vane himself sat his horse at the edge of the standing stones, having ridden with the patrol once word reached him of the moor ghost's capture, his cold gray eyes alight with something like triumph. The witch who has plagued this march for 11 years, Vane announced to his men, caught at last, working her curses among the old stones, exactly as I suspected. And it seems his gaze moved to where Oliver knelt over Kasia, helping her rise, both of them battered and bleeding. We have caught her accomplices as well. The tollkeeper's orc bride herself, meddling in forbidden rites. You caught nothing but a healer trying to save your people from a poison your own baron's miners caused, Kasia snarled, struggling upright despite the blow she'd taken, blood trickling from a cut above her ear. The sickness was never a curse, you fool. It was your own kind's greed, digging where they shouldn't have. Save your lies for the burning ground, Vane said coldly. This one, he gestured at Gret, will be branded a second time, and this time the mark will not be enough to satisfy the crown's justice. She will burn at Fenwick's crossing tomorrow at dusk, before every soul in this march, as a lesson to any who would shelter such corruption. His eyes moved back to Cassia. As for the tollkeeper's bride, and the tollkeeper himself who has, I now understand, been falsifying his ledgers for months to smuggle the marked across his bridge. We shall discuss your fates after the town has seen justice done to the witch. Oliver felt the world tilt beneath him. They knew. Somehow they knew everything. The next day passed in a haze of dread. Vane's men held Oliver and Cassia under guard in the toll house itself, ironically enough, forbidden to leave but not yet formally arrested, while word spread through Fenwick and the surrounding crofts that the Moor Ghost herself had finally been caught, and that she would burn at the bridge crossing at dusk. By the time the sun began sinking low and orange over the moor, a crowd had gathered on both sides of the Greywash, crossing larger than any Oliver had seen since his own wedding day. Villagers from Fenwick, farmers from the outlying crofts, even a scattering of orc riders who had come, whether from curiosity or some deeper unease, to watch the human justice being done at the border of their two people's lands. Gret Ashwood was brought out in chains, her gray hair disheveled, her frail frame swaying with exhaustion, and bound to a stake driven into the stones at the very center of the bridge. The same spot, Oliver realized with a sick lurch, where he and Cassia had stood to be married. A brazier of coals glowed nearby, and in it, heating slowly to a dull orange, sat the iron that would mark her a second and final time before the flames took her. "People of the march," Inquisitor Vane called out, standing atop a makeshift platform beside the stake, his voice carrying easily over the hushed crowd. "For 11 years this woman has plagued our lands with her forbidden arts. She has been seen among the old stones, working curses that have poisoned your water and killed your children. Tonight justice is finally done." "That's a lie," Oliver shouted before he could stop himself, pushing forward against the guard who held his arm, Cassia straining just as hard against her own captors beside him. "She saved your children. She sealed the poison in the ground, the very poison your own miners caused 2 winters back. Silence the tollkeeper," Vane snapped, and a guard's gauntleted hand cracked across Oliver's face, staggering him. That single blow was the spark that lit the fire in Cassia Ironhide that no chain, no guard, and certainly no inquisitor was ever going to fully contain. With a roar that echoed off the stone arches of the bridge and silenced the entire crowd, Cassia tore free of the 2 guards holding her arms with a strength that sent both men sprawling, and in 3 strides she crossed the bridge to stand directly between Oliver and the platform, her body a shield, before turning to face the crowd with blazing eyes. "You want your witch, Inquisitor," she bellowed. "Then look at her properly before you burn her, and know exactly what you are killing." She strode to the stake before anyone could stop her. The guard seemed too stunned by her sudden violence to react in time, and with one powerful motion tore away the remains of the hood still tangled around Gret Ashwood's shoulders, exposing the old healer's face fully to the crowd, then seized the woman's bound wrist and thrust it high into the air, displaying the old brand scar for every soul on that bridge to see clearly in the dying light. "This woman sealed the poisoned spring beneath the 9 Sisters 2 nights past, with my own hands beside hers, using an old rite that has nothing to do with curses and everything to do with saving lives," Cassia shouted, her voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd, human and orc alike. "The sickness that killed your cattle, your children, it was never witchcraft. It was poison, leached from a mining vein your own Baron's men dug into 2 winters ago on the moor's edge. This woman is the only soul in 3 counties who knew the old rite to seal it. Without her, the sickness would have kept spreading, kept killing, all winter and beyond. She is not your curse, Inquisitor. She is the only reason your people are not burying twice as many children this spring." A murmur ran through the crowd, uncertain, disbelieving, but Oliver saw faces turning toward each other, saw the seed of doubt Cassia's words had planted beginning, however slowly, to take root. "Lies, spoken by an orc to protect her own kind's corruption," Vane snarled. though Oliver noted a thread of uncertainty in his voice now too, the first crack in his composure since they had met him on the wedding bridge months before. "Guards, seize her. Bring forward the drover's grandson," Kasia said, cutting him off, her voice ringing with absolute command. "The boy from the Hallow Croft, who wasted grey and dying not 3 weeks past. His mother is here, I see her, at the crowd's edge. Ask her what cured her son, Inquisitor. Ask her what medicine this healer brought to her door in the dead of night, at risk of her own life, when your physicians in Fenwick had already given the boy up for dead." A woman near the crowd's edge, thin, work-worn, clutching the hand of a small boy who, Oliver now saw, though pale, stood upright and breathing easily, went white as every eye in the crowd turned toward her. "It's true," the woman said, voice shaking but clear enough to carry in the sudden hush. "She came in the night, weeks back. Gave him a tincture, sat with him 3 days straight till the fever broke. I never knew her name till now. I only knew my boy was dying and she saved him, and I never once saw her work a curse, only good medicine and gentle hands." The crowd's murmur grew louder now, no longer simply uncertain but beginning, in places, to turn, a farmer near the front calling out that his own herd had been dying before the sickness stopped just days past, exactly when Kasia claimed the rite had been worked. An old woman insisting she remembered Gret Ashwood from before the branding, remembered her as the gentlest midwife Fenwick had ever known, remembered weeping the day the Inquisition drove her out into the moor. Vane's face had gone hard and pale, sensing the crowd's mood shifting beneath him like sand under a rising tide. "Enough," he snapped, gesturing sharply to the guard beside the brazier. "The sentence stands. Bring the iron." The guard hesitated, glancing uncertainly at the murmuring crowd, at the woman and boy who stood as living proof of Gret's healing, at the towering orc woman standing immovable between the Inquisitor and his prisoner. "Bring the iron," I said. Vane's voice cracked with fury now, all pretense of calm authority gone. The guard moved, reluctant but obedient to years of training, lifting the glowing iron from the brazier's coals. And it was in that exact moment, with the iron's orange light reflecting in Kasia's furious eyes, that Oliver Keller, ordinary, humble, overlooked tollkeeper of the Greywash Crossing, did the bravest thing he had ever done in his life. He stepped forward past his wife and placed his own body directly between the approaching iron and Gret Ashwood's chained form. "You'll have to brand me first," Oliver said, and his voice, though it shook, carried clearly across the silent bridge. "Because I falsified my ledgers to help this woman and dozens like her cross this bridge to safety, all through last winter and into this spring, and if that makes me guilty in your Inquisition's eyes, then here I am. Mark me, Inquisitor. But you'll not touch her while I'm standing." The guard with the iron froze, staring at Oliver, then at the massed crowd behind him, many of whom Oliver realized with something like wonder, were nodding now, murmuring agreement, a few even stepping forward themselves to stand beside him on the bridge, ordinary folk who had grown weary, in the space of one dusklit hour, of watching their neighbors burned for the crime of being different. "Get out of my way, tollkeeper," Vane hissed, drawing his own blade now, stepping down from his platform, "or I will see you both burn together." The sound of horns cut through the tension like a blade through cloth deep, resonant hunting horns from the moor side of the crossing, and every head on the bridge turned to see a column of mounted orc riders emerging from the mist at a hard gallop, led by a broad-shouldered figure with grey threading his beard, and a horn broken at the tip, Thakar Ironhide himself, having ridden through the night the moment word reached his camp that his daughter stood in danger on the human side of the treaty line. He reined his horse to a halt at the bridge's edge, his warriors fanning out behind him in a show of force that made even Vane's remaining guards take an involuntary step back, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of a man who had buried enough kin in old wars to have no patience left for new ones. "Inquisitor," Thakar Ironhide called out, his human speech accented but perfectly clear, "I was told my daughter's life was threatened on this bridge." I find instead that she stands defending a healer who saved orc children in my own camps from the same poison sickness that struck your Fenwick. If you raise that iron against my daughter, or against the human she has claimed as her own, or against the healer who saved children of both our peoples, you will not merely break the treaty I signed with your baron. You will begin a war neither of our peoples can afford, and you will begin it alone, Inquisitor, without your baron's blessing. For I have already sent riders to Vance's own keep with word of what you have done here today. Vane stood frozen on the bridge, iron sword still drawn, surrounded now by a crowd turning visibly against him, an orc war party at his flank, and the tollkeeper and his monstrous, magnificent bride standing immovable between him and his prisoner. Whatever calculation ran behind his cold gray eyes, it resolved at last in favor of survival over conviction. "This is not finished," Vane said, lowering his sword slowly, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "The crown will hear of the sorcery worked on this Moor, treaty or no treaty." "Then let the crown hear also," Cassia said, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with Oliver, "that it was sorcery which saved children your own Inquisition would have let die rather than admit your baron's mining brought poison to this land. Let the crown hear that. And let them hear, too, that the orc bride your steward married off to a humble tollkeeper, as a political afterthought stood on this bridge, and defied your iron with nothing but the truth and her own 2 hands." Vane said nothing further. He mounted his horse, gathered his remaining guards with a curt gesture, and rode from the bridge into the gathering dark. And though rumors would follow for months afterward of his eventual disgrace at the capital stripped of his office, once Baron Vance's own investigators confirmed the mining poison and the healer's innocence, Oliver never saw the man's cold gray eyes again. Gret Ashwood was unchained on the bridge that evening by Oliver's own hands, the crowd around them shifting from fear to something like shamefaced gratitude as the old healer, exhausted but alive, was helped to her feet by the very woman whose son she had saved weeks before. "You did not have to defend me," Gret said to Oliver quietly, once the crowd had begun to disperse into the dusk, once Thakar Ironhide had dismounted to embrace his daughter fiercely, murmuring words in the orc tongue that made Cassia's eyes shine wet in the torchlight. "You are a bridge-warden tollkeeper, not a warrior. You could have been branded or worse." "I know," Oliver said simply. "But I'd rather have taken that iron than watch it touch you, or watch my wife live the rest of her life knowing I stood by and did nothing while an innocent woman burned." He glanced toward Cassia, who was still speaking quietly with her father, her hand. He noticed with a warmth that never seemed to fade, reaching automatically for empty air beside her, seeking his even mid-conversation, out of habit now as much as need. "She taught me that, I think. That some things are worth standing for, even when you're the smallest person on the bridge." Gret smiled, tired but genuine, and squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "Then she chose well, tollkeeper. Better than she perhaps even knew, that first day on this bridge." Thakar Ironhide approached Oliver directly then, and Oliver felt a familiar nervousness return, standing before the towering clan chief whose good opinion he had never quite dared hope to earn. "My daughter tells me," Thakar said, studying Oliver with sharp, assessing eyes so like his daughter's, "that you stood between an inquisitor's iron and a stranger's life, for no reason beyond what you believe to be right. She tells me you have spent a full winter falsifying your baron's own ledgers to smuggle the hunted to safety across this very bridge, at considerable risk to your own neck." He paused. "When your baron's steward first proposed this marriage to me, I confess I expected little of the tollkeeper chosen for my daughter. A man of no consequence, your own people called you. It seems your people were fools." "I don't know about that, sir," Oliver said honestly. "I'm still just a tollkeeper." "You are the husband of Cassia Ironhide," Thakar corrected, "and there is no small consequence in that, whatever title you carry or lack. My daughter does not give her hand easily, tollkeeper." I watched her refuse every custom your people tried to press upon her at that wedding, and I confess I feared, in that moment, that this marriage would collapse before it began. Instead, I find, months later, that she has bound herself to you by rights older and deeper than any human custom, and stood on this bridge tonight prepared to die defending both you and a stranger from injustice. He extended a broad, scarred hand, and Oliver, after only a moment's hesitation, clasped it firmly. You have my respect, Oliver Keller. It is not given lightly, and I do not offer it twice. That night, once the crowd had fully dispersed and the bridge stood quiet again beneath the stars, Oliver and Kasia sat together on the stone parapet where they had first begun to truly know each other, months before, her hand in his exactly as it had been every significant moment since their wedding day. You could have been killed today, Kasia said quietly, watching the black water flow beneath them, standing in front of that iron. So could you, Oliver said. Standing in front of your father's whole war party, defying an inquisitor with nothing but your voice and the truth. I am Orc, Kasia said. It is expected of me to be fearless, or at least to appear so. You are only a man, Oliver. A good man, but only a man, and you stood there ready to take a brand meant for someone else entirely. I told you before, Oliver said, turning to look at her fully in the moonlight. I'm not a man who looks away, not from you. Not from anyone who needs standing up for. That's who I've always tried to be, long before you rode into my life and turned it upside down. He squeezed her hand gently. Turns out it was worth the trying in the end. Kasia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone soft in a way Oliver rarely heard, stripped of all the fierce command she wore like armor before the world. When my father first told me of this marriage, I thought it would be a cage. A political chain dressed up in a human wedding gown, meant to tame the wildness out of me for the sake of a treaty I never asked for. She looked at him. I refused every custom that day on this bridge because I feared, more than anything, being made small, being folded into a shape that would fit quietly into your world, the way your steward and your baron clearly expected. Her thumb traced slowly over his knuckles. But I kept the hand holding, Oliver, because even then, some part of me already knew you were not trying to cage me at all. You were only ever asking to walk beside me. That is a very different thing. It's the only thing I ever wanted, Oliver said. Not to own you or tame you or change a single thing about who you are, just to walk beside you for as long as you'd let me. Forever then, Kasia said, echoing her own words from their wedding day, and this time there was no defiance in it, no political weight, only a promise given freely between two people who had earned every inch of the trust it now carried. I meant it that day on this bridge, though I did not yet know how deeply I would come to mean it. I mean it more now than I have ever meant anything in my life. They kissed there on the bridge beneath the stars, slow and certain, and when they finally drew apart, Kasia rested her forehead against his, and Oliver felt for the first time in his life that he was not merely tolerated or accepted but truly, wholly wanted, chosen again and again by a woman who could have had any life she pleased and had decided deliberately that his was the one worth choosing. Spring gave way to a gentler summer, and the graywash crossing settled for a time into something like peace. Word of the healer's vindication and the inquisitor's disgrace spread through the march and beyond, and the purge that had swept the moorland for the better part of a year began, slowly, to lose its grip as more voices came forward to speak against it. Gret Ashwood remained near Fenwick through the summer months, her name cleared at last, tending the sick openly for the first time in over a decade, and more than once Kasia and Oliver rode out together to visit her small cottage on the moor's edge, sharing meals and old stories beneath the shadow of the 9 sisters. But the toll house, for all its history now woven into their marriage, had begun to feel, by summer's end, too small for what they had become. There are other crossings, Kasia said one evening, as they sat together over their supper, other borders where the purge still runs unchecked, where families like the one we first helped across this bridge still huddle in the mud, waiting for someone willing to look the other way. She met his eyes across the table. Gret has told me she means to travel north, to where the sickness in her own bones will let her, teaching the old rites to healers who might yet save others from what nearly claimed her. I find I do not wish to stay behind while she does. Oliver considered this for a long moment, looking around the small stone toll house that had been his entire world for years before Cassia Ironhide walked into it and changed everything. He thought of Finn, who could easily find another tollkeeper for this crossing now that peace had settled over the march. He thought of the road stretching out beyond the moor, uncertain and wide open, and found to his own surprise that the thought did not frighten him. "Then let's go," he said simply, "wherever the road takes us. Wherever there's someone who needs a bridge crossed safely, or a truth spoken against a lie, or a hand held when the world's decided they don't deserve one." Cassia's smile, when it came, was the warmest he had ever seen on her face. "You would leave this place, your bridge, your ledgers, everything you built here before I came." "I built all of it alone," Oliver said. "I'd rather build whatever comes next with you beside me. That matters more to me than any bridge." They left the Greywash crossing on a clear morning in early autumn, exactly 1 year after their wedding day, Finn having found a capable young widow from Fenwick willing to take up the tollkeeper's post. The ledgers handed over honest and complete at last. No more secrets needed now that the purge had lost its teeth in this corner of the march. Gret Ashwood rode with them as far as the northern road split toward the mountain passes, before turning her own mule toward whatever village needed her next, promising to send word when she could. Oliver and Cassia stood at that crossroads together, the standing stones of the moor rising gray and ancient in the distance behind them, the wide unknown road stretching ahead toward a horizon neither of them could yet see the end of. "Where to, then?" Oliver asked, looking up at his wife, who sat taller and prouder on her mountain horse than any queen he could have imagined, still dressed in the same fitted travel leathers she had worn on their wedding day, having refused, in the year since, every human dress the good wives of Fenwick had ever tried gifting her. "Wherever the road leads," Cassia said, reaching down without hesitation to take his hand as he mounted his own horse beside her, exactly as she had taken it that very first day on the bridge, refusing every custom but this one, keeping only the promise that mattered. "As long as your hand is in mine, Oliver Keller, I do not much care where the road goes. I have everything I need right here." He laced his fingers through hers, feeling the familiar strength and warmth of her grip, the scar on her wrist that matched the one on his own, the year of danger and tenderness and hard-won trust that had brought them from a bridge full of strangers to this open road full of possibility. "Then let's find out together," Oliver said, and they rode out from the crossroads side by side, hand in hand, toward whatever horizon waited for them next. Two people who had started as strangers bound by politics and treaty and had become, through fire and flood and quiet devotion, something far more enduring than any custom could have made them partners, equals, and above all else, chosen, each of them, by the other, for exactly who they were. The more mist rose behind them as they went, wrapping the standing stones and the old bridge in its familiar gray silence, but ahead of them the road ran clear and wide beneath a sky slowly clearing to blue, and neither Oliver Keller nor Cassia Ironhide looked back.